So the first thing we're going to be talking about is aperture. There's a number of different things that we can do to get started, but first of all I thought it'd be good just to show you an example of a lens and what an aperture actually is. So if you think about an aperture as a sort of like an iris, the way I normally explain it is basically there's a whole stack of blades sort of fit together and they sort of close in on themselves. Okay, and the idea is that you go from having a big hole to a small hole. Okay, and it's all a little bit backwards, because if you have a big hole, you've got a small number, an F number for your aperture. But if you've got a small hole, you've got a big F number for your aperture. Okay, so here's what I mean. This camera, this lens I've got here, this is just what they call a nifty 50. It's a 50mm lens, and it's got a very large hole. I don't know, you can sort of see the light coming through. You can see that's a really big hole. That's an f1.8 lens, meaning that it lets through a lot of light. I've also got another lens here. This one's a bit more expensive, and this is a f1. Let me just check. Yeah, 1.4, and you can see that's got even more light to let through. Okay, so I'll bring them a bit closer so you can see. So why do we need light? Why do we need more light, and what difference does it really make when you're taking photos? Well, if you think about it, all photography is light. It's the capturing of light. So by changing the size of the hole that the light comes through, we're actually changing the amount of light that you can capture. Okay, so if you have a camera, I should grab my camera in a sec, but what happens is when you take a photo, there's a little shutter that lifts up, okay, and behind it you've got your sensor. Okay, so this is how it normally is, and then when you click the button, the shutter goes up and the light falls on this sensor. Now if you've got a small hole at the front, not much light's going to come through, and not much light is going to expose onto that sensor. But if you've got a large hole at the front, a lot of light's going to come through, and a lot of it's going to go onto that sensor when that shutter lifts up. Okay, so that's sort of how it works, and I'm going to show you some examples and show you how things really work as you play with it in the real world. Alright, so we're in the garden, and what I'm going to do is, just with my 5D and that lens that you saw before, I'm just going to throw it onto manual, and I'm going to kick it off with an aperture of 1.4. Okay, which is the very largest that we can do. Okay, let through as much light as we can. Alright, so here we go. Alright, here we go. So that is 1.4. I'm going to scoot up to 2.0. Yep, then I'm going to go to 2.8. Yep, then I'm going to go up to 4. And what you can see there is that image is getting darker and darker, and that's because there's less light coming through each time. So what I'm having to do is compensate a little bit with some of the other settings on the camera. So I'm just going to do that so that you can sort of start to see this effect of what the aperture does to your actual image, other than lightness and darkness. Okay, so I'm going to just make a few adjustments. I'm going to stick it on f8. Okay, there we go, and I'll take one more, and I'll do that at f22, which is the smallest that we can go. Alright, there we go. Alright, cool. So let's take these images into Lightroom and let's have a look at the differences. Alright, there we go, there's the images there. I'm just going to uncheck them and just get the ones I want. You'll see I've just renamed them so that I am really clear on what the F settings are. However, it is all saved in the metadata of the file, and you can see that all up here. Okay, so I'm just going to go to develop, and basically what I was really trying to show you in this this set of photos was the differences that happen with as you change that aperture. So this one here is 1.4. So this is the widest that lens can go, and you can see we've got really creamy backgrounds. Okay, so notice there's really, like, it's really not detailed at all. And if we go in, the amount that is sharp is actually so fine. Okay, so if you're ever shooting with 1.4, you've really got to make sure that that you are perfectly focused, otherwise you're going to ruin the shot. One other thing to note is that whenever you're using a lens at its full open aperture, you've got to keep in mind that the lens isn't going to be performing at its finest. Okay, so what you'll notice is the clarity of this image, even where it is focused, becomes much sharper as we go up through these apertures. Okay, so just keep your eye on that. So this, like I say, this is 1.4. It's got a very thin line of focus. This is probably the best way to show it here. So just that tiny little piece of that leaf is in focus. Okay, and the rest of it's out. So like I say, you got to make sure that you really know what you're doing with such a wide aperture. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the 2.0. You can see again that background's just it's just starting to come in. Okay, a little bit more focused than before. You'll notice that more of these leaves here are in focus, more of this one here is in focus. Okay, and as we scoot through these, you'll notice it gets darker. As I said before, that happens because we're letting less light in, and I'm actually not changing any of the other settings. So you'll notice it's still shooting at 1,250th of a second, okay, which is very fast, and I would normally adjust that, and I do adjust that when we get to these higher ones. So this is f4, okay, and again you can see it's starting to come into more focus, but you'll notice it's very dark. So you can see those first 4 images, they really do show off that amount of light being drawn into the camera, but also that background, changing the background. So if I go over to the f8, you'll notice that heaps more is in focus now. We can really see the detail on those leaves, and the bricks behind are semi-focused. So you can see that this is f22, and most of the image pretty much is in focus. The bricks really are almost in focus. Okay, you know exactly what they are, whereas back here in f1.4 it's completely different. Okay, so I'm just going to bring it back to here. So what can we take away from that? Well, the main thing is when you're shooting different types of images with different amounts of people, for example, you're going to need to think about what aperture you're wanting to use. So here's what I mean. So if you have a group of people and they might have a bit of a curve to how they're standing, if you were to use a really low aperture or a really low aperture number, okay, so really wide open, you would have an issue where some of the people would be in focus and others wouldn't, which you may not even pick up on your camera so much because it's not that visible in the little LCD panel, but it's something to think about. So if you're shooting a group of people and you're standing relatively close, I'd always make sure you're sitting on an f maybe 8 roughly, okay, just to make sure that everybody's in. You can get away with less as the further you move back, but it's really important to make sure that everybody's in focus, and that's something you could just check in camera. You might just need to zoom in and just see that everybody's in focus, just their faces. Otherwise, what's some other examples? Another example might be landscapes. Okay, if you want to shoot a landscape, you need to make sure you've got your aperture as wide as you possibly can. That's wrong. If you're shooting landscapes, you really need to make sure you've got the smallest aperture you possibly can, within reason. Obviously, if it's fading light, you're going to need to think about what you have it on there. So that's something to think about. Group photography, play with your aperture, make sure you get it how you want it, check in camera until you start to sort of get to know what your camera will do in whatever situation. That's pretty much all I've got for you today, so thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe and make sure you follow me on Twitter, right there, Twitter, and yeah, talk to you soon.